For some of us, the story of our life is very public. Everybody knows about it. And yet, for some of us, the story of our life is very private. And we don't share it with very many people, if any. Tonight, my hope is that our guest will encourage you that no matter where you are on your journey in life, that you would know that there's hope no matter what you're going through. Tonight, my guest is Chrissy Kim, and she's here to share her story, a little bit of her story. And welcome. Hey, I'm glad that you came. That means a lot to me that you are here.
So my name's Chrissy. I'm married to Julian. We've got 3 kids, twin girls who are almost 10 and a little boy who's 5. I work as a doctor. So specifically, I'm an oncologist or a cancer doctor, and part of my job is also doing research and being a scientist.
Wow.
So that's part of my job as well. We've lived in multiple different cities across Western Canada, and most recently we've been in Winnipeg now for the last 6 years. And since we came back to Winnipeg, we've been attending Soul for almost all that time.
I met you, I don't know, how many years ago? 10, 15 years ago? Was it that
2007, I think.
Yeah, we went on a trip together to Ecuador, which was, who would have thought that I would know her kids years later and her husband. And anyway, it's been great getting to know you guys. Maybe tonight you could just share, tell us a little bit about what you do and maybe what would be relevant to share with our viewers tonight.
So, as I mentioned, I work as a cancer doctor.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to share was a bit about my journey through training and getting to this point in my life. And specifically, I felt that I wanted to speak to young people who may be going through the rigors of school and training and feeling like they don't know where they're going to end up, or they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I wanted to speak about hope and faith and God's graciousness that guides us through those times.
That's really good. And I'm thinking about people my age that have gone back to school too, because trust me, when you're juggling family and you've got all these things going on, sometimes I think you just don't know how you're going to make it through. You feel like a bit suffocated.
Yep.
So I'm going to take what you say tonight too, and I'm going to take it to heart for sure. How has faith affected your journey?
So I knew I wanted to be a doctor at a very young age. Like, I remember being 5 years old and knowing that that's what I wanted to do. And I loved science and school and learning about the body and caring for people. So I knew I wanted to do this for a long time, but I'm not from a medical family. So I think, I know I was a little bit naive and overly optimistic, maybe.
How did your parents, how did they look at that when you said, hey, I want to be a doctor?
Oh, they thought it was great. I mean, they encouraged me in whatever I wanted to do. But I think I didn't, even though I had some people in my life who were doctors who could warn me a little bit about what was to come, I knew that my training would be long, which I didn't mind because I loved school. But I had no idea of the physical, mental, and emotional toll that long period of training would have on me.
How so?
So I actually moved to Winnipeg to do medical school many years ago. And when I moved here, I mean, I knew literally no one. So I had very little social contacts. You know, I met people in my class, but I think there is a loneliness to that when you're starting something so rigorous in a place where you don't know anybody. And school was exhausting. You know, we would go to classes from 9 till 5, sitting and listening to lectures. And I remember feeling like it's almost like you've got that fire hose on your mouth. You know, you're learning all day long and almost like learning a new language. You know, a lot of medical stuff is in Latin, so you're learning what all these words mean. And then after school, you know, you'd grab dinner and then you'd go to the library and you would study until midnight. And that was repeat, you know, every day. And
For how many years, Chrissy, did you go
so
through this?
the way most medical schools are now is the first 2 years are in the classroom. So you're
Okay.
doing that in the classroom. And then your third and your fourth year are when you start to get onto the ward, start to see patients in person.
Did you do all of that training here in Winnipeg?
I did that 4 years here.
Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, I did my residency in Vancouver and then my further training in Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So altogether, it was about 12 years, I think,
Wow.
for our training. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a long time.
So it was long. So like I said, once you start to see patients, it comes with a responsibility. I mean, people's lives are literally in your hands. And we would work really long hours, you know, and it wasn't uncommon for us to work 28, 30-hour shifts. And the rota would be that you do that once every 4 days. And, you know, in those 28, 30 hours, you're running. You know, you're not sitting, you're not sleeping. You're going usually from the emergency room to the ward, sometimes to the operating room, you know, diagnosing patients, troubleshooting things, trying to treat patients, and dealing with literal life and death situations. So, I mean, it's exciting. It's you know, that's what we train to do, to be there. But it certainly took its toll. And I think it's pretty common when you talk to people who've gone through the training that at some point they experience burnout. And maybe don't recognize it at the time, but in retrospect, you can recognize it.
How did you recognize it that there is that possibility of going through burnout?
So I don't know that I recognized it at the time. I mean, you know that you're physically exhausted. There are a lot of demands on you. You know, you're still a trainee, so the expectation is that you are able to answer questions. You know what's going on, you know the answers, and you're grilled constantly. And I think at some point during my training, I just realized that I was exhausted. You kind of forget why you went into it. You lose the joy and the passion. And sometimes you lose the compassion too, which is not a good situation to be in. And, you know, sometimes in those situations, it can be so lonely. I remember a lot of my friends who I had before medicine didn't understand, you know, what I was going through in training. And I remember sometimes friends would call and Julian would say, oh, you know, she's on call. And they'd call the next day being upset that I didn't call them back. And he'd be like, she's still working. She hasn't come home in the last 30 hours. You know, so I think that can be isolating.
Yeah.
And all of that can kind of build up into burnout.
So there's really no sense of balance.
Yeah.
Like if you're working all the
Yeah.
time and you don't have time, let's say, for that social aspect of your
Yeah.
life, do you feel that can be...
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Do you feel a lot of physicians might have that, or especially when you're in school and you're preparing that?
Yeah, I would think most doctors would say that during their training, there's no balance. I don't think there's even at least in my field, right? There are various fields, and maybe some fields
Sure.
are better than
Yeah.
others. But balance is just not really part of it. It's not possible. Like, you know, we would work these crazy long shifts, and then you go home and you study because you're going to be grilled the next day, right? And you better know the answer.
Right.
And, you know, so Julian and I were married. We got married when we were in medical school.
What year was that?
2005. We just had our 15-year anniversary last week.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
thank
so
you.
Awesome.
And so we were early on in our marriage, and we were doing our training, doing these long hours. And I still remember there were days where we wouldn't see each other for days because of our schedules. So, you know, he might be on call, and then by the time he gets home, I'm on call. And, you know, sometimes that would feel really demoralizing and sad. And we always both tell this one story where we were both working on very busy services. And so he was working on the stroke, seeing people who had had acute strokes, and I was working just seeing very sick patients who needed to get into hospital. We hadn't seen each other for days. And in the back of the emergency room, we passed by each other and just kind of like waved hi and then kept going. And, you know, and then those are the days where, you know, you realize you haven't eaten. You know, we used to figure out how to sneak snacks in our pockets, or you haven't used the bathroom all day, or haven't rested. And but sometimes just seeing each other would give me some hope. And I really do believe, you know, during some of those dark times in my training, God would show me himself, and it would be just by seeing another believer and just remembering that there were other believers, other people of faith who were there, who were going through what I was going through. And, just that itself would be encouraging. Or, sometimes I still remember being up on the 16th floor of the hospital in Vancouver and just looking out the window, and you see the beautiful scenery, and it's just a reminder of God's creation. And that would encourage me. And sometimes just an undescribable peace, the peace that transcends all understanding, that we know is from Christ alone. And sometimes in the worst of situations, I would have that peace, and it would be a reminder that God was with me. And I really do think those things sustained me through some of those really dark times.
Did you ever have a time where you just wanted to quit?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So after you finish medical school, you go off and do your residency. I did my residency in Vancouver, and my first year was pretty rigorous. Again, I'd moved to a new place, so didn't really have many social contacts. You're kind of just getting to know people. And I was working this crazy job, these crazy hours, exhausted. And I had finished 2 months of a really grueling rotation, and I was just exhausted. And I was due to come up on more of that kind of schedule, and I just thought, like, physically I needed a break. I recognized I was burnt out, and I went to my program director, so they're the person who's kind of in charge of overseeing our education, and I had told my program director that I needed like a week or something. I was just exhausted and burnt out. And so my program director kind of said, okay, well, you can take a week, but you'll have to redo everything again. And I sat in it and I thought, I don't want to redo it all. I've come so far. I'm just going to push through and get this done. And so that was my response. And then my program director came back and I think really felt that I was therefore being dishonest about feeling burnt out, and that I was maybe using it as an excuse to not do more work. And that was really devastating to me because that wasn't my intent. I didn't feel like it was in line with my character. And I really felt that these people who are in charge of my training didn't know me. So I felt unknown. I felt really isolated and shameful. I felt ashamed that maybe I wasn't tough enough to push through more. And so there was a period of time where I was so down, and I really did contemplate quitting. And I think it's tough because in that time, everybody is putting their best face forward and trying to show that they're up for the task. So it's not really, at least where I was, it was not shared amongst trainees when you were having a rough time. And it wasn't spoken about. And after the fact, when we all finished, people would come out and say, like, I had a really rough time at this period of time. And others would recognize and say, I wish I knew, because we could have supported each other, but that wasn't the culture.
Has that affected how you now look at people that are training? And
Absolutely. So, I mean, we're involved with trainees all the time, and I do try to encourage trainees to talk about how they're doing, talk about how they're feeling. I do think there's a lot more recognition of the need to address mental health now and to try and have some balance and some boundaries. I've really put some intentional boundaries into my life now, in terms of how I manage, being a mom and a wife and a doctor and a researcher. So I've put some really intentional boundaries in place, and so I'm not afraid to share that with trainees and share how I've made that work.
How can you tell me how you've made that work? I'm curious.
So I work 0.8, which means I work 4 days a week. And I have 1 day off. That basically I have permission to not be on my email or my pager and not be available. And I do spend that day with my kids. we don't have family here. So, when we moved here, we felt that it was really essential that we built some sort of flexibility into our lives, and just an ability to take the kids to the dentist or go to the bank or do those kinds of things. So, and I did learn very early in my career, and thankfully to some of my mentors later on in my training, that it was up to me to protect that. People will take from you as much as they can get. Yeah. As I'm sure you know, in all areas of your life, people will take as much as they can get. And so it really is up to me to protect my time and to be available when I'm available, and if I'm not available, to guard that and to protect that.
So if you're a student, how would you ask, or how would you maybe recommend to somebody who's going through the schooling part, how would you recommend to them to find some sort of balance, or can they? Or is it just something you kind of have to just suck it up and you just got to go and move forward and know that it's only for a time?
Yeah. Well, I think what you said at the end is important, that it's only for a time, right? There are seasons of our lives, seasons in our life that are going to be busy, that are going to be hard, that are going to be crazy. Right. I think we need to prepare for those. In the Bible, Jesus tells us that we will have troubles. But we should have hope because he's overcome the world. Right. And so I think we should anticipate that there are going to be hard times, there are going to be troubles. And one thing that I've learned through my journey is the importance of preparing when things are good. Read your Bible, pray, build yourself up, so that you have that strength and you have that encouragement from Christ for when the hard times come.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
I've learned it's important to remember. So remember the good times, and I have a journal. I write down a lot of my prayers, and so sometimes I'll sit and I'll go back and look through it and remember the periods of time that God has brought me through, or the times that He's shown Himself faithful. So
where would you leave anybody who's watching today that maybe is in the middle of this, Chrissy? In the middle of, maybe they're just starting the journey and they're tired. They're worn out.
So one Bible verse that my dad would email to me when I was going through difficult times in my training was from Romans 5, which talks about our sufferings and how our suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character produces hope.
Wow.
And so I think that's really true. And so remember that our difficult times are not for nothing. They really do build character. And hope in us. So I think that's important. I know in lots of the other interviews you've done, people have talked about community. And so that's been vital as well. Yeah. Like I mentioned, Julian and I moved around a lot. And so each time we moved to a new city, it took us a long time to develop community again. Yeah. You might meet people at church, but really kind of to get to know people and develop those relationships takes time. Yeah, but it was important for us, and so helpful in sustaining us and encouraging us through different phases of our lives.
Well, I'm really glad that you ended up pursuing this career, and that you've gone through to the end, because now, honestly, Chrissy, I look at how you're helping people. And sometimes they think with the goal in mind. Like sometimes God calls us to things in our lives, and it doesn't mean it's easy. Yeah. But if we can keep the goal in mind and know that if this is something that we really feel we need to do, and I mean, I can't imagine the amount of people that you impact on a daily basis, that just benefit from who you are.
Yeah, I think so. That's another important point, is that we have to remember to what God has called us, and be faithful to what He has called us to. It's easy to forget what He's called you to when things are tough. Yeah. And I feel like one thing through my training that I've realized, I'll always be kind of the minority in some way. Being a believer in Christ makes you a minority automatically. Yeah. Being a woman in medicine, you're a minority that way. Sometimes being a mom, or the color of your skin. You know, all of these things make
Yeah.
you a minority, and it will make me a minority in where I am. But I have to remember the calling that God's given me, and that there's a reason that He has called me here, and a purpose to that.
Yeah, how powerful is that? That's great. You know, Chrissy's story really resonated with me in regards to especially how perseverance builds character in us, and that really brings hope. And maybe that's hope for other people. I don't know where you're at tonight, but maybe you're a mom and you've been teaching your kids through COVID, you know, and you don't know what September is going to look like. You don't know what the fall looks like for your family. And maybe you're trying to juggle it while you're also working. You have other expectations that are upon you. Maybe you're a student and you're just like, I don't know if I can make it through. The pressures are just unbelievably hard. And I would hope that Chrissy's story would be an encouragement to you, because, you know, we go through different seasons in our lives, and some of the seasons prepare us for other seasons. And so maybe you're going through a hard season right now, trying to figure it out and trying to be diligent and just persevere through whatever it is. Be encouraged and know that whatever it is that's your goal down the road, that you can make it and you can get through this season, and you can allow God to use you in that next season with what you're doing right now to prepare for it.